So last week, we started talking about the church, and we started talking about the purpose of the church, right? And I talked about Peter and on this rock, and the whole idea of it was I talked about that we understand and we believe not just in church, but we believe in the purpose of the church. And the purpose of the church, right, is to spread the good news. Our job is to share the love of Jesus Christ. Now, I shared something last week, and it was a little difficult for me to do it because even in my brain it was sort of heresy because I took a verse out of context, and you all know that I hate doing that. But I did it on purpose to generate a response, and I did. So I shared the idea, right, because I used the verse, wherever two or more are gathered, I will be there. And I said that if you're out walking alone in the woods, Jesus isn't there with you, right? And it generated a pretty good response. Now, that's not really completely correct because we know that God is always with us, Emmanuel, right? But I wanted to bring that up and I wanted to generate a response because I wanted people to think about the purpose of the church. Not just that we come here and we sit or we go to a building, but what is the purpose of the church? And if we are holding our relationship with God, our relationship with Jesus Christ in our hearts, and if what we think of church is our time off by ourselves, then we're sort of missing the idea of the purpose of the church. You still have a great relationship with God, but you're missing the idea of the purpose. And as I finished up that message last week, I said that coming into this week, we would talk about, okay, how do we as a church put this purpose into motion? How do we actually be the church? And I actually had some fun putting it together. Now, I can't remember where I'm at. I need a slide to keep me on track here. So, the idea of the structure of the church, I actually have a copy of this, right? Robert's Rules of War. They say that this was one of the books that helped change the world. The idea of parliamentary procedure. Because any organization, a church, right, has to have structure. And if we go through the book of Acts, that's where we start to see the church have structure. In fact, as I got to this part of my sermon and I was putting it together and I was thinking of the idea of the structure of the church, because we used to be what we called the purpose-driven church, right? Y'all remember that? We had our 5 purposes, and that's not a bad thing. The churches that still follow the purpose-driven, it's great as long as, and it's one of the problems we got into, is we looked at the 5 areas of the church, but we didn't really see them as the purpose of the church. We saw them as the management of the church. And it's one of the reasons I thought maybe we should slide away from it for a little bit and sort of reorient it where our hearts are. Because most organizations follow Robert's Rules of Order, but maybe not to a T. I know that one of our organizations that we're involved in, we follow Robert's Rules, but we don't get really nitpicky about it. When we as a church get together for our fellowship Sundays, we follow an aspect of Robert's Rules, but we don't get nitpicky about it. That's the structure of the church. And I sort of laughed as I put it together, right? Because where are we? What building is this? The Grange. It's the Grange, right? So the Grange, and I love this because we look at give me the next one. We look at the structure of an organization, and on those Sundays where we announce, oh, by the way, there's Grange this week, we tear this place down and we put it together in the format that the Grange, that's 1873 for you, Jacob. We put together the structure for the Grange and how they function. So every organization has this. We have it. We can't get away from it. You can. It doesn't matter how much you want to focus on fellowship. It doesn't matter how much you want to focus on community. and how laid back we want to be, right? Today I happen to wear a tie for the fun of it, but y'all know I'll stand up here in my little 3/4 zip things that I wear all the time, right? Nobody says anything because we're laid back. But even with all of that, no matter how relaxed and casual you want to be, you still have to have some sense of structure. And you have to be aware of it. And we have to stay within that realm. In other words, we have chaos. And the early church shows us structure. And I don't know if I just said this or not, because I went off on a bit of a tangent in my own brain. But I was looking at the book of Acts so much that I actually wrote on the top of my whiteboard that when we are done with this study, even if it takes until next January, the very next thing that we're all going into is we're going to go through the book of Acts. I have it written on my whiteboard right at the top. The book of Acts is the next sermon series, because I think we need it. It's just good for us. So that's great. That's the structure of a church. And I say that laughingly because I didn't really give an absolute structure, did I? Because you could walk into any church and have it be a little bit different. You could have it, be formal. You have people wearing big robes. Or you can have a house church, right? Tonight, next door to me, there will be a church service. They don't call it church. They call it I said it the other day and I can't remember what he calls it, right? But it's a gathering. It's not even house church. It's like community. He's doing something completely different, and yet it's not heresy. He's following Scripture wonderfully, but there's still structure. I've seen his structure. It's set up pretty much the same way every week, and the idea is he'll reproduce that into other communities. So, church then isn't really the building or the absolute structure or how you do a worship service or how you manage the idea of a church, because that's different. That varies from Eastern Orthodox to Roman Catholic to us, to the house church that will be next door to me tonight, right? It's all different, but it's founded on the idea not of Robert's rules, but of the people. That's church. And that's what I was trying to bring up last week. Is where are you as an individual? Where are you as part of that structure? Where are you in the laying of that foundation? Which block are you? What is your role? And I got some great feedback last week. I always love that people try to challenge me. That people do challenge me at times after service, and I hope people continue to do it because I grow from it. All right, because people were pretty thrown off when I said, if you're walking in the woods by yourself, right, Jesus isn't with you. And what I was really trying to say is you're not really being the purpose of the church, you're being pulled inwardly. But we are all different. And as I got to thinking about this, and in the book, I hope this is my next slide, because I don't know, I'm just talking at this point. It is. Randy Frazee, when he's talking about the church, he uses from Ephesians 4, which is a wonderful, wonderful writing explanation from the Apostle Paul to the church in Ephesus about this is really how you be the church. And so this verse, Ephesians 4, 15 to 16 says, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every aspect the mature body of Him who is the head. That is Christ. From Him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. So I was putting this together, for whatever reason, for as old as I am, a skit from Sesame Street popped into my head, thinking about everybody doing their part. And I was amazed by Google, because all I could remember, it was Sesame Street, and in one part of the skit, everybody brought potato salad. So I did a Google search, Sesame Street potato salad. And this picture popped up. This is one of the skits from like the 1970s when I was a kid. Here's the idea of this skit. Ready? The name of the skit, which I didn't know until I did my Google research, I just remembered the essence of the skit. The name of the skit is The King Has a Picnic. And so he tells all of his people, we're going to have a picnic, and everybody's all excited. And so everybody goes off and brings something back. And they do this like 3 or 4 times. But every time somebody would bring something back, everybody brought back the exact same thing. And I always remember the one part where everybody brought back potato salad. And this is the picture. This is a giant vat of potato salad. All of the townspeople, all of the king's people brought potato salad. And then they were like, well, this isn't going to work. We don't have anything else, right? So they all took their potato salad and they left, and then they'd all come back with something, and they'd all come back with the exact same thing. And the idea of the skit is, well, there were several parts of it. One, you have to have great communication, which follows into our structure. And 2, you have to be able to do what your gift is, what your talent is, what your strength is, and don't try to do the same thing that everybody else is doing. And so the king then has this powwow and says, hey, what if we all brought different things? And then people started speaking up, going, oh, well, I could bring the, right? And it sounded exactly like a potluck at church. Where how many times do we have the exact same thing at church? Right? What's that?
Or a family reunion.
Or family, yeah. So our purpose as a church is that we all do what our strengths are, and we build off each other on those. Right? And if you remember last week during the message, somebody spoke up and said, well, hey, should I feel guilty then because I can't be here on April 6th because I have to work? Does that make me less of a Christian, right? And I said, no, we have each other's backs because there are times when, somebody can't be there and somebody else just steps in. That's part of us being the church. Here's the 2x4 for today. I've been speaking slowly, and I know that I've been losing you guys' attention a little bit trying to build into this part. But this is the part where y'all are going to get mad at me. I'm moving this thing out of my way before I do it.
We can just do what we
You can go ahead and start throwing stuff at me when I get going on this part.
throw a coffee at you.
As long as you throw it into my cup. After church last week, somebody came up to me and said, well, wait a minute. You talked about going to church, but what about that? And they brought up that example that doesn't really completely exist. Right? When somebody's trying to make a point of something, so they go way off on the absolute extreme. They go, well, now you got to agree with that, right? It's like, for the abortion arguments, right? People go, well, what about rape? What about, and then they try to take the whole big spectrum and put it down into that one little extreme example that represents less than 1/1,000,000% of the actual, right? So this person comes up and he goes, well, what about, and this isn't really what they said, but I'm going to have fun with it, right? So it's like, well, what about that one person that single mom who has 14 kids and she works 3 full-time jobs and 2 part-time jobs and she has to use public transportation because she doesn't drive and she's handicapped, so she's in a wheelchair, and you go all the way down to, what about that person? Do you expect them to go to church? I stopped and I looked at the person for a second and I said, you know what? No. I expect the church to go to her. You see, because, this is a Jim Rohn quote, if anybody knows who Jim Rohn is, if you don't, look him up. because this is a secular quote, this is not religious, right? If you really want to do something, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse. And do you know how many excuses I have heard as a pastor over the years? And I don't say anything. All right? I don't get into arguments or debates. I don't really call a lot of people out on them because I'm standing here listening and I'm going, well, that's where your heart is. If it was a priority, if you really wanted to make it happen, you'd make it happen. If it's not that important to you, you're going to come up with an excuse. And we do it for all sorts of things. But see, the idea is the purpose of the church is it has to be our priority. It has to be our purpose. But remember, we all don't have to bring potato salad. So you don't have to feel guilty if there are conflicts. Right? Because that same person brought up to me and said, well, wait a minute, I don't have a choice over my job. If my employer says I have to work on Sunday, I have to work on Sunday. Absolutely. That happens. Right? We know there's a few people missing here today because they're going to a shower, which, if you knew the background and the history of the relationship of the person they're going for, it's a really special thing. I mean, it's pretty cool. That's a like lifelong, long distance relationship that they've had through their organization, and to have that close of a fellowship, really, it's something the church can learn from. And so I don't fault them for not being here today, right? Because they didn't choose when the shower was going to be. They didn't get to pick the date. They were given an invitation, and to not go would have been rude and honestly hurtful, right? So does that mean that they're not being the church? No, right? Because later on, they're going to be here. They're going to be watching this thing. Prayerfully, right? They're still being the church, just at a different time. See, if we're going to have the purpose of the church, we have to stop having excuses, both individually and collectively. And we have to pull off of our strengths. So what do you do? What do you do with the woman who has 14 kids and works 3 full-time jobs and can't drive?
It doesn't exist.
What?
If it really doesn't exist.
Yeah, you do hope it doesn't exist, but
It does. I watched a YouTube video one time.
Give her rides.
what?
Give her rides.
Give her a ride.
Help support her family there, watching the kids for her when she needs it.
You know, it's funny because that was the first thing when this person was bringing up this theoretical thing, and they said, well, you know, she has all these kids, and I said, well, then the first thing she'd probably want to be is at church, because if a church is really being a church and doing it, you know, wonderfully and prayerfully, the adults should be able to come in and relax a little bit and have a break. And maybe that wouldn't be this church because we have limitations. But I know some churches that would take somebody like that in a heartbeat and have all of the facilities and all of the people in place. And right, because it's not about coming to this building, it's about having an experience with Jesus Christ. And there's lots and lots and lots of places where people meet on Sundays. And here's the thing, it's not always on Sunday. That's the one thing that really bugs me, I think, as a pastor. Like, this is the one thing that really just gets under my skin, is that people will look at it and go, well, I couldn't go to church this week because I had to work on Sunday. Okay. What were you doing Monday? Or Tuesday? Or Wednesday? Thursday, Friday, Saturday? Like, was there any time that you got into the Word? Was there any time that you... Because there are places to go. There are things to do. We offer Tuesday night. Come on down. Kathy feeds you. Hang out. We have some good conversation. We discuss the Word. There's some fantastic radio messages that play regularly. Were you busy then too? See, I can do this over and over and over again, but you have to get to the root of it. You have to get to the very beginning of where the excuse is coming from. Because some excuses are legitimate. They're not really excuses, they're conflicts. We just used a great example of the few people who are missing here. That's a conflict. That happens. But the excuses that we have, both personally in our heart and collectively, they have nothing to do with what we say is in the way. They have everything to do with how our heart is absorbing it in. And there's no easy way to say that. Because honestly, when somebody comes up to me and says, you know what, I couldn't be there because, and they start giving me this line, all I really want to go is, okay, why? Where is your relationship with God? Okay, you couldn't be there for that. Or could you? You just didn't want to. I really didn't have that big of a conflict, but it wasn't a priority. And there should be no shame in that, but be honest about it. You have to be honest about it if you're gonna grow as a church. And here's why. Here's the very, very heart of all of it. What is the purpose of the church? I think I just said it earlier in this message. What is the Great Commission? To spread the good news. Right? Our job is not to make converts. Our job is not to assimilate people to a lifestyle. Our job is to give people a genuine, honest opportunity to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And let them make their decision. And here's why our excuses aren't just damaging us, but they're damaging the purpose of the church, and they're damaging they're damaging the people that we reach out to. Because if our relationship is not genuine, if our relationship is not transparent, if our relationship is not vulnerable, if we aren't honest with ourselves, with where we are with Jesus Christ, then how can you possibly share it with anybody else? It doesn't mean that your relationship has to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you have to beat yourself up. I don't want anybody walking out of here with guilt today. I don't want anybody in here thinking, well, you're not good enough. Because honestly, none of us are good enough. That's why Jesus Christ died for us. But we all have the blessings and the power and the possibility to actually share genuinely and vulnerably. And if you're going to have a positive relationship and be able to share that relationship, you have to be able to do it. Case in point, you should just know at this point, at some point in the sermon, I'm going to talk about our marriage. Because it just happens. Right? So, yesterday morning, Kathy gets up, and we start to go for a run, and I was having a very bad workout. And so I just broke off from her, and I let her go on her run. I went on mine. And then I felt bad because she came looking for me, and she thought I went a different way. But she still got her run in, and we saw each other at home, right? And so we were talking about our workouts and what we're doing, and as we were talking about it, I had to turn to her and go, sometimes I just want to run alone. Sometimes I just want the solidarity. Right? I'm being open, I'm being honest, and I'm being vulnerable. But I'm not being insulting and I'm not hurting the relationship. Right? Because she took it as, yeah, I get it. Sometimes I like to run alone too. Sometimes it's just therapeutic. Right? But if we didn't have a solid relationship, if I felt like, oh man, if I say anything, I'm going to hurt her feelings. Oh, if I'll just hold it in. I don't want to be completely honest about it. I don't want, because, right? And then you're just miserable inside. And I honestly feel that a lot of Christians are walking around miserable inside because they don't want to just be honest with Jesus. And if we can't do that, then we can't be the purpose of the church. That's where it all starts. Be honest with yourself. This is where I'm at. This is what I'll do. This is what I won't do. Here's why I won't do it. Maybe 5 years from now, you'd be like, you know what, I will do that now. Actually had that happen. I gotta talk about it again. But she said something yesterday, and I actually thought of this as she was saying it. When we first started the Wesley Woods ministry thing, back, 4 years ago, we were living close to Wesley Woods, and it was, at that point I was full-time ministry, so it was just laid right into being part of my job that I would be at Wesley Woods and I would, work on trails. And at the time, she had to drive an hour almost back and forth to work, one way. And she was tired a lot. And my heart breaks for her looking back on it. And she at times, she would come out and help us on the trails. And then there were times where she was like, I don't want to do this. I want my time. I want my weekend. I don't want to feel like I have to work 7 days a week. And that's where she was at. There's nothing wrong with that, right? That's just being honest. You can't hold that against anybody when they're just honest and saying, look, these are my limitations. I didn't take that as though she didn't love Jesus. I didn't take that as though she didn't have a heart for the ministry. I took that as though, look, I have limitations. This is where I'm at. Yesterday, in the rain, we go out to Wesley Woods to get going again, right? Because we're behind the 8 ball to get going for this year now. Lots happening really quick. I had to finally ask her, like, we're still out to work, and I'm like, are you ready to leave yet? And she goes, well, yeah, except, I want to have that good stopping point. Like that point when you go, okay, we got that much done, we're good. And I looked at her and I said, it's like a half a mile from now is the most legitimate stopping point to have that moment. And she's like, yeah, okay, we should stop that. I was like, oh, thank God, I want to go home, I'm hungry. So we load up the tools, we haul out, out of the woods, we load up, and we get out of there. And she says to me, there's a whole build up to this, right? She goes, man, this is just addictive being out there, isn't it? Right? Do you acknowledge saying it? Yeah? It's just addictive. As soon as she said that, I was laughing, going, man, 4 years ago, that wasn't where her heart was. And now, it's therapeutic because there's a purpose to the ministry, I believe. When we first started, we were just building trails. We had no idea what the camp had planned to do. We were just trying to do something. Now, there's a purpose. There's a goal. There's deadlines, right? You can see it. The purpose. And when you grasp onto a purpose, well, there's the whole purpose of the church or one little tiny thing, and you grasp it, the excuses don't even come into your head. You don't even think about them anymore. Because you're like, this is what I feel like I have to do. This is what I want to do. This is my purpose. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I should be doing. And I see it week after week after week with each other. Big things, little things. Right? We had to redirect Jacob this morning. Because Jacob's like, well, I'll come in, I'll start doing that, I'll start doing that. We're like, Jacob, you're in the band. We need you there. He's like, oh, okay, I'm over there then, right? Don't worry about the kitchen. Somebody else will come in and take care of that. They'll see it as a purpose. Right? Did you have to make the coffee today, Jacob? No. Is there coffee made? Yeah. Right? Because every part of the church doing their purpose in love. That is the church. Amen?